What if I told you that the hit Nintendo game series Splatoon might not have existed? Back when Splatoon was first being developed, Nintendo was afraid that their new game wouldn't sell, being just a shooter prototype with blocks of tofu using ink instead of bullets. Nintendo had the decision to make a new IP, which was risky, or turn it into a Mario game since everyone and their grandma knows who Mario is. In the end, Nintendo decided to take a risk on a new IP, and now it's one of their best-selling series, selling more than Kirby and Fire Emblem. It's pretty normal to see companies slap characters onto a product, and lo and behold, it sells. Like SpongeBob mac and cheese, Minecraft cereal, Minions fruit snacks. Heck, I normally don't buy drinkable yogurt, but then there was this funny little Sanrio guy sitting on the box, and now I have a crippling drinkable yogurt obsession. And those examples were just food. We all had that friend who had the Pixar's Cars chair, or the Disney Princess lunchbox. I mean, just look at all the Pikachu stuff there is out there. Pikachu clothing, Pikachu mugs, Pikachu phone cases, Pikachu pencil cases, Pikachu lamps, Pikachu desks, Pikachu chairs, Pikachu. Pikachu has to be one of the most famous mice out there. Right up there next to Michael Mouse. And yes, I will be referring to him as Michael Mouse because Mickey is a nickname, and nicknames are for friends. That mouse is not my friend. So what stops people from just slapping famous rats onto everything in hopes of selling things? Honestly, nothing. This is how we get amazing products such as these. But aside from nothing, companies that own the rights to these famous characters can get pretty protective on who can use them, because doing so violates their copyright, which can cause a whole slew of problems for them. But things are changing, because you know who isn't protected by copyright? Michael! So before we get into everything, and why I think copyright is a joke, let's define what copyright is, just so we know what we're talking about and there's no confusion on what's protected by copyright and not. Copyright, in its most basic form, is the right to copy something. Amazing, isn't it? Owning the copyright to your original creations protects you from people from stealing your work, so you can make a healthy living off of your creativity. In other words, copyright is a type of intellectual property that protects original works of authorship as soon as the author fixes the work to a tangible form of expression. Things that are considered tangible form include paintings, sketches, photographs, sculptures, musical compositions, sound recordings, software programs, books, poems, blog posts, and a number of other mediums that I could possibly not even think of. So you make a funny little picture and you're about to post it to twitter.com. Congratulations! You're now the proud owner of a brand new copyright. The moment you affixed your creative work into a tangible form, in this case a JPEG or a PNG, or bitmap if that's what you're into, it just gave you every right to control who can use it. You just made a sick beat and bounce it out to show your friends? Protected by copyright. You write a poem about how much you love your significant other? It's copyrighted. You stream your art process or work in progress, and it's copyrighted. Took a picture of a man vaguely gesturing to the background? Copyrighted. Sculpted a vase that looks like an unmentionable? Copyrighted. Crayon drawing? Copyrighted. Recorded a TikTok? Copyrighted. Made a video game? Copyrighted. You made a blog post explaining your ideas of your new VTuber model and how you'll have the fanciest hair and the flashiest clothes and how you'll be the most unique cat, bear, rabbit thing. Not copyrighted. Although you have fixed your ideas into a tangible form in the form of a blog post, ideas can't be copyrighted. Even if your ideas are creative, unless they're put into a tangible form of expression, your ideas can't be copyrighted. Copyright protects people's expressions, not ideas, concepts, or methods of creation. More examples of this would be short phrases, slogans, everyday symbols, signs, letters, and colors. You can't copyright a stop sign, the letter H, or the phrase wet pussy. This is a real case, look it up. However, these can be either patented or trademarked, which is an entirely different branch of intellectual property protection, usually reserved for brands, corporations, and inventors. This is why we get terms such as Mattel Barbie Pink and T-Mobile Magenta. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to get into the differences and the history of each, but just know that copyright protects creative work, trademark protects brand recognition, and patents protect inventions and processes. So as a copyright owner, what does that give you? Well, first and foremost, it gives you the right to make copies of your work and distribute them. If you make a movie, you have the right to make DVDs and sell them. You have the right to display or perform your work. You can post it to every video hosting platform or even to a theater. You have the right to make spin-offs or derivative works based on it. Turn your movie into a musical or stage play. In short, you have the right to copy, the right to distribute, and the right to make derivatives. The act of stealing someone else's work and trying to pass it off as your own is called plagiarism. And while plagiarism isn't illegal, just frowned upon in academia, There are times when plagiarism violates people's copyright. An example would be re-uploading someone's Newgrounds animation onto YouTube and claiming it to be yours. Quoting an article word for word, beat for beat is an example of plagiarism, but doesn't necessarily violate copyright. Remember when I said ideas can't be copyrighted? Well, in some cases, paraphrasing or quoting someone just means you're taking their ideas. But if you quoted an entire article, regardless if you credit them or not, it could be considered a violation of copyright. And if someone decides to breach that copyright, you can stop them dead in their tracks. As long as you can prove you own the copyright. For something like uploading to a website like YouTube or Twitter, currently known as X, or any art sharing website, you can prove it as simple as showing the upload date. How could you share something you don't own if it wasn't publicly available in the first place? Seems easy enough. But there are some things that are a bit more complicated, like waiting to release a song you made in July on a particular date in January, where there's not much competition on newly released music. When all of a sudden someone else releases a new song a few weeks ahead of you and it sounds oddly similar. You'd best register that copyright the moment you finish that song. Registering copyright isn't necessary, but it does offer some benefits. In order for your copyright claims to hold up in a US court of law, it has to be registered in the copyright system. It gives people public access to limited information about copyrighted material without actually having to publish it, such as the title, the type of work, and the creation date. You could also use registered copyright to seek compensation for monetary damage caused by plagiarism and infringement. As long as you have the copyright to your work, you have full control of who gets to use it and even how much of it is used. And how long do you get to keep that copyright? Until you die. And then some. Current copyright law gives people their copyright until the end of their life plus 70 years. You'll be a dead man and still own the copyright. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, dang, that sounds ridiculous. Because it is. What's a deceased person going to do with intellectual property after their own demise? And what stays relevant for that long? Let me tell you how messed up this got, because the people responsible for it was willing to give society the big D up their asses. Get it? Like a peen. Believe it or not, copyright only lasted 14 years at one point. In 1790 to be exact. You could then renew it again for another 14 years for a grand total of 28 years. After 28 years, all registered creative work went into the public domain, making it available for anyone to use in the pursuit of developing culture and academic progress. But around that same time, some countries in Europe had copyright lengths of up to 42 years. So the US opted to change their default length from 14 to 28, plus an additional 14, making a total of 42 years. Eventually, countries in Europe decided it would be best for copyright to be able to provide income for the copyright holder for at least 3 generations. So it was decided that life of the author plus 50 years would be enough to cover that. It also introduced moral rights, which means that copyright is rightfully given to the creator regardless if it was registered or not. This is extremely important because it allowed people who did not or could not register their work to be able to protect their work without someone copying it and registering it before you. The US was still stuck in the registry system, but eventually switched over in 1976 in preparation to join the Berne Convention, which screwed up copyrights for many people. As many creative works approached their expiration, including a particular big-eared mascot, some companies lobbied for extensions. Historically, copyright law only protected a few types of creative works, like books and maps. Many of the extensions were hidden among other changes to copyright, like the inclusion of new mediums, such as CDs, cassettes, digital distribution, and broadcasting. What was once 28 years became 42, then 56, then life plus 50, then life plus 70. All of which could have been avoided because eventually the big animation studio found a loophole to protect their IP, which wasn't even under copyright, but trademark, which had indefinite protection since its conception. So now that that's out of the way, one question I always have is, why is it that people always try to make creepypastas or horror genre spin-offs with popular characters? Fear is a strange emotion. Normally, it's not an enjoyable emotion. We used fear to evolve as a species. It was a fight or flight response when danger was involved. Fear of snakes? Snakes can be venomous. Fear of heights? Turns out falling from high enough can kill you. Fear of deep water? Well, we haven't really evolved to breathe underwater yet. Fear of women? I'll get back to you on that one. Applying the fear response to the right situations meant not dying, therefore being able to pass on your genetics, meaning a species adapts to its environment. When we experience fear, we trigger a fight or flight response. The brain releases hormones which gives us a burst of energy to fight back or escape a potentially harmful situation. So long story short, why do we like experiencing fear? Return to monkey. In all seriousness, we like to experience fear because we can experience the highs from the adrenaline while staying safe. And if we've had enough, we can simply turn off the TV or take the emergency exit. Not only that, we can bond with others through shared experiences. Kids have tons of fun playing tag together, which is basically simulating chasing prey or escaping predators. Think about how many people still think about creepypastas like Sonic.exe or Ben Drowned, how we get memorable characters like Jason or Ghostface. Fear can be as simple as getting caught playing Game Boy or 3DS late at night, hoping your mom doesn't catch you. Experiencing fear together can also be a bonding experience. Fear is also important to worldly cultures, manifesting into holidays such as Halloween or Thanksgiving. Now, in regard to turning characters into horror characters, the things we're familiar with are comforting. They're familiar and expected. Michael Mouse is a jolly, happy fellow. Winston the Pooh Bear is a stout, round bundle of happiness. But we also like to play around with alternative ideas as a result. Super Mario Bros., a timeless game, a game filled with fantastical enemies and amazing power-up abilities on a quest to save a princess. And then you realize that that's all there is. Bing, bing, get the coin, stomp the Goomba, shoot the fireball, so long, gay Bowser, your princess is in another castle. But what if Mario was evil? This is the same reason why people make Mario is a psychopath videos. People get too comfortable with their favorite characters, so they need something to make it more interesting. We overanalyze, we critique, and eventually, it snowballs into something that's inflated and flanderized. And that's how we get creepypastas. The best thing about online creepypastas is that it subverts expectations with a juxtaposition. It's usually a story with a situation that people think they know the ending to, but then switches it up, and presents it in such a way that is at least somewhat believable. Creepypastas tend to target family-friendly series or long-time nostalgic series since it's easier to subvert people's expectations. I don't think you'll find a popular creepypasta featuring Kratos from God of War or Pyra from Xenoblade, but you'll definitely find some popular stories and fan games from series like Doom. It's also why family-friendly themed horror games are really popular, like Baldi's Basics and Amanda the Adventurer. These comfort characters are supposed to be comforting, so the moment they make you uncomfortable, it sticks out like a sore thumb. The funny thing is, because we've been making creepypasta stories and games of our favorite series for so long, the tropes associated with them are expected now. At least for those who have been in the horror space for quite some time now. Don't get me wrong, they're still fun and exciting, but you can only play so many creepypasta Mario fan games until you feel like you've played them all. But you know who doesn't have a lot of horror-themed games and films? Michael Mouse! And this is where some people found the opportunity. The whole public domain horror trend didn't really start with Winston the Pooh Bear back in 2022, but it definitely set some directors' eyes on what's popular and profitable when it comes to legally accessible intellectual property. An earlier concept of making something in the public domain into a horror genre is American McGee's Alice. While not necessarily scary, it took a spin on what if Alice's Adventures in Wonderland had a horror theme. But until recently, very few copyrighted works were added to the US public domain, so anything made in the 1920s up until now was basically impossible. Cue Poob's entrance to the public domain, and a film director took that opportunity to take what if so-and-so was a psychopath train of thought and applied it to the well-known beloved character. Because it subverts expectations. Now, that's a great idea. Take a popular character and profit off it by making the most absurd movie ever. Except it's not like they had any grand ideas. They were just taking the cheap, what if family-friendly was scary route. Because let's be honest, no one is trying to put a twist or creative spin on the plot of these pieces. The reason why people are drawn to making things out of these characters is because they hold a legacy, not because their stories are compelling or that their world is well fleshed out. I mean, Blood and Honey got such raving reviews, it's surprising they were rolling in money right now. So partway into making this video, I realized that the director of the film, Reese Waterfield, is trying to make a twisted childhood cinematic universe. So not only are they trying to make a sequel to Blood and Honey called Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 2, but also a third one called, you guessed it, Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 3. And on top of that, there are other characters on their hit list so far, such as Bambi, Peter Pan, Pinocchio, and Sleeping Beauty. And to top it all off, a crossover film ironically called Pooniverse, Monsters Assemble. Pooniverse! Pooniverse! Because, honestly, I think they have some sort of illusion of grandeur if they're expecting this marketing to be able to sustain itself over the next few years. But I'm just a guy on the internet. I don't know what's going on. But what about this cool little loophole in copyright called parody law? Well, I hate to break it to you, but there is no thing called parody law. But parody is covered by a broader set of laws called fair use. If you skipped over the copyright segment, you might want to go back just in case some of this doesn't make any sense. Fair use law allows for people to use copyrighted content without the approval of the copyright holder under certain circumstances. US copyright laws are also governed by the US constitutional amendments, specifically the First Amendment, which is the right to freedom of expression, or as some phrase it, free speech. Fair use laws in accordance to the First Amendment are as follows. Number 1. Purpose and character. Why was this made? Does it make sense without the original? Does it provide new meaning through criticism? Number 2. Nature of the original. Is the original work a work of fiction or non-fiction and historical? Number 3. The amount used. How much of the original work was used? And 4. Effect on the market. Does this devalue the original? Does it infringe on a potential market? And note that market harm due to criticism, like a negative review, does not negate fair use. Parody is typically a satirical or comedic commentary based on the original work, and as such, it has to address elements from the original work. Address, not just use. Addressing parts of an existing piece in a parody can range from anywhere to its message, its script, its lyrics, its screenplay, its gameplay. This can be very confusing because addressing elements from the original can be subtle or not apparent at first glance. Let's take PETA's parody games for example. As terrible as they are, they're good examples of parody and they're direct about it. They go as far to address how Pokemon can be seen as animal abuse, and how Mario wearing a Tanuki suit is very much akin to skinning animals for their fur. Music and song parodies are the Wild West of fair use. It's hard to tell what's being addressed and why parodies are made in the first place. The music industry is notorious for suing over the most mundane similarities. A group by the name of Two Live Crew deliberately took the song Oh Pretty Woman by Roy Orbison and made their own parody version of the song.
Pretty woman, walking down the street, pretty woman. Big hairy woman, you need to shave that stuff. Big hairy woman, you know I bet it's tough. Big hairy woman.
Some notable aspects about the song is that it uses some of the song's original recording, its composition, its lyrics, and its lyrical structure. The song is undoubtedly similar to the original, if not completely ripping off the song, but under a court of law, the song was deemed to be in fair use. The reason? Aside from being a completely different genre, the parody wrote off the original's lyrics to be bland and boring. The only things used substantially were its lyrical structure, which was necessary to address the original's lyrics, and it was doubtful that their rap rendition of the song would affect the market value of the original classic rock song. But at the end of the day, fair use is deemed by the jury, so not every case of parody is black and white. So ideally, creepypastas and horror parodies would fall under the fair use category. So a Michael Mouse parody horror film would totally been able to exist prior to his introduction to the public domain. Someone could easily argue that their horror film based on the happy-go-lucky mouse is a parody on how messed up his actions are. Unfortunately, there's one major factor that prevented that from happening. Parodies are usually low budget and insignificant in the grand market. At least on the internet. Parodies shared on the internet are usually so under the radar and non-impactful that most companies don't even bother issuing cease and desists. Either that or the company just loves the fact that fans are making fan-created works. In some cases, doing something would just harm their image as a company. This video is probably the most notorious Mario parody, and Nintendo could easily have this taken down for using Mario in such a way that degrades his image. But they don't. Striking it down would most likely harm Nintendo's image than it would preserve Mario's image. Sega could easily take down Sonic Dream Collections, the weird foot fetish Sonic game, but they don't. The key reason it's rare to see parodies exist in the form of high-budget films and animation is that it's just too high of a risk. In most cases, if a film is high-budget, they usually pay a license or share royalties anyways. So sure, you could argue parody under fair use law. In Steamboat Willie, you can see Randy Rat here swinging cats around by the tail or honking some hogs. That's not happy or jolly. It's kind of messed up. And you could easily come up with a messed up animation or film of Rodney Ronit doing all the things he normally does in his official Disney animations, but even if you did have full grounds on making a true, fair use certified parody, Disney would most likely run you into the ground with 10,000 lawyers, billions of dollars, and the fury of Goofert in an unrefereed hockey match. And this doesn't just fall with Disney. It's any company, really. The fact that a high-quality project exists and is using their IP is threatening to the eyes of a company, because there's a chance that people could confuse it with an official product without the quality assurance or downplay a company's efforts. Even with successful high-budget parody movies, they are very deliberate on the fact that they are parody movies. They're not marketed as anything else but comedy films. None of the characters experience growth and are whittled down to usually one-note type characters. For example, Scary Movie isn't a horror movie. It's a comedy movie, despite having all the horror movie tropes. They also tend to target multiple movies instead of just one, typically in the form of a one-shot gag. They're not made to create a cinematic experience, they're made to make you laugh. So what I'm trying to say in this segment is that if you want to argue your film or animation is parody, the only genre you're safely allowed to make is comedy. Now, I do agree that characters should remain within a company that is active. I agree that Disney should have the right to use Vinnie Vermin as a mascot and differentiate themselves to others trying to use him. Disney's mouse has to be different from, let's say, Paramount's mouse. And there is a solution, and it's called Trademark. I also said we didn't have time to explain this, but I changed my mind because I wrote this part after I wrote my entire script for the video. Trademark exists to protect companies from each other and ensure customers don't mistake one company for another. Some of you may not be old enough to remember, but there was a time where every video game console was called a Nintendo by the masses. Nintendo had to step in and remind everyone that not all game systems are Nintendos. There are Segas and Ataris too. And if Nintendo didn't step in, their trademark would have been diluted and they would have lost their trademark, meaning anyone could make a Nintendo system. Now, how this translates into characters is that characters can represent a company or a brand. Michael obviously represents Disney, but Disney also has a number of other characters, like its princesses, like Cinderella, Snow White, Pocahontas, and why is it that we don't confuse Mulan with Hua Mulan of Chinese folklore? Because it's in the title. Disney's Mulan, Disney's Peter Pan, Disney's Aladdin, Disney's Sleeping Beauty. Every single movie released by this company has their trademarked logo slapped onto the cover. Why? So people recognize this is owned by Disney. One of the big issues when it comes to using the character Mickey Mouse is that people are likely to confuse someone else's work for Disney's work. But that's where Trademark can help solve this. Where Disney used Trademark to build their own brand of princesses, it's Trademark that can help dissolve Mickey of his Disney image. Disney can still hold on to Mickey as a trademark, but everyone else can make their trademark too. I'm no lawyer, but the more we emphasize trademark enforcement rather than extending copyright, the better the system for enriching our culture and creativity. But I still think it's going to take some time until a proper public domain Mickey exists. The imagery, that trademark that we have now, needs to be diluted and generalized. Like how Alice has taken many forms, yet we generally see her as a young girl dressed in blue. Or Sherlock Holmes as a sharp-minded man garbed in plaid. Although these Disney characters have recently fallen into the public domain, everyone is still attached to this image. Disney's image. And I think that the worst thing that Disney has done when it comes to copyright, not just lobbying for extensions, but standardizing imagery for so many of the pre-existing works already in the public domain. How do you imagine Snow White to look like? Probably like this. Or Cinderella? Probably like this. But this isn't strictly a Disney thing, they just did the most damage. Like, when I say Frankenstein's monster, most people think of Universal's version with the bolt running through its neck. The funny part about this whole video is that I'm saying parodies are striving to bastardize and turn IPs into dark room versions for shock value, while Disney has been doing the exact opposite for decades, taking grim and dark fairy tales and making them into family-friendly versions. If you've heard the original stories from the Brothers Grimm, you would know that a lot of their fairy tales have very cruel punishments and repercussions, as well as mature themes. For example, in Snow White, the queen is actually Snow White's mother, and instead of falling off a cliff, she is forced to dance in red-hot iron shoes until she dies. In Cinderella, the stepsisters don't try on the shoe to see if it fits, they mutilate their feet so the slipper would fit, but the blood gives it away. And after Cinderella marries the prince, magical white doves, which were replaced by the fairy godmother, peck out her stepsister's eyes. You get the idea. If it's one thing I can applaud Disney for, is that they're transformative when it comes to pre-existing stories, and it's only gotten more creative as time has passed. And this is where I think a lot of creatives can pull a piece of inspiration from Disney. Instead of using a character because it holds cultural recognition, we can shape them and tell new stories within our own cultures, keeping in mind the themes and morals. One thing that's very prevalent in the stories by the Brothers Grimm are things like child abuse, as per Cinderella, Snow White, and Rapunzel, which all had abusive parents. While child abuse is apparent in any culture, Disney puts another layer on it with hope in the face of adversity. Be it a fairy godmother or a prince to come sweep you off your feet, at the end of the day, we all wait in hopes for days to get better. And Snow White came out in 1937. Guess what was also happening in the 1930s? The Great Depression! Culture, baby! And it's not just themes and stories we can derive from, it's character relationships and environments too. Disney's High School Musical takes the whole book out of Romeo and Juliet, two star-crossed lovers set apart by their social status. One a jock, the other a nerd. We can be inspired by works of art instead of trying to recreate them, creating new worlds out of them. We have numerous stories about legendary knights and holy weapons, but Excalibur has existed in many different stories and taken many different forms. It is nonetheless known as the holy weapon known to bring sovereignty and prosperity. And speaking of Excalibur, another great way to use material in the public domain is to mash them up with other characters, either your own characters from your own story or other characters that are publicly available. The Fate series does this wonderfully by mashing up iconic characters and historical figures as servants going head-to-head with each other. And Shin Megami Tensei does this too in the form of demons and summons. That being said, it's totally within their rights now to make a Mickey Mouse servant or demon. I'm just saying. Oh, and the yellow bear with the red shirt too, that would be pretty fun. But of course, none of this is all black and white, and isn't restricted to things in the public domain. Not every adaptation needs to be drastically different, but experiencing old art forms with modern expression is interesting. Final Fantasy VII, although still under the same publisher, brings a fresh experience in its remakes, by reusing old story beats and introducing new ones, expanding on its universe. Scooby-Doo has seen some interesting adaptations from both good and bad live actions to both good and bad animations, but we still recognize the iconic imagery that the gang holds. For the most part, at least. Although they're not in the public domain, directors, writers, screenplay artists, they all take great care into pushing pre-existing IPs into new directions. What I'm trying to say is, don't make things like Velma. Please stop trying to make Velma out of public domain IPs and making uncomfortable, contrary situations. There is no reason why Shaggy has to openly say he hates weed. It's just trying to be quirky. Please, please. Someday down the line, there will be expanded stories and alternate tellings of our favorite stories and characters from our childhood. Unfortunately, due to copyright laws, anything made in our lifetime will likely be creatively unavailable to us, and that's not changing anytime soon, if at all. As we develop new forms of entertainment, as we've progressed from verbal storytelling to stage plays to books to movies to video games to whatever comes in the future, the creative what-ifs of our favorite stories and characters can always take new forms and evolve. But I'll tell you what won't evolve. Our constant need to turn pre-existing characters into sane creatures of destruction. We have got to stop doing this. Why are we obsessed with this? I swear. Thank you for watching this video. I have a lot of opinions about copyright, and I think copyright shouldn't last for almost 4 generations, but hey, money. Speaking of money, I'd like to thank all my Patreons who supported this video, which is none, because I don't have one. I lied to you, I'm sorry. I'm just a guy who likes making video essays because I like to write and share my thoughts and opinions. To be honest, a lot of this video is anecdotal. Turns out there aren't many studies being done on making characters creepy, but I do like to get the historical events, the math, and the science all correct. If you like the video, likes and subs really help me out. And did you know that if you replace the word horror with porn, and fear with horny, you pretty much get the same result. And if anyone wants to like remake this video but like swap the themes, you can go right ahead. Creative Commons. I didn't get a chance to talk about Creative Commons, but long story short, it's like the public domain, except the creator still has the rights to it. Creative Commons is like usually there to help share knowledge and develop culture, which is basically what I'm wanting to do, and the opposite of what copyright does, by the way. I'm sorry, a lot of examples in this were video game related. I am a video game channel for the most part, with like a little bit of side of music. But anyways, I got more videos coming out. If you like them, they'll just pop up whenever I have the chance to make them. Thanks again. Stay caffeinated. Peace out.